I used to think that love was steady. Once you built a life together, everything was set. But over time, I realized that love can twist into something painful, almost like a tool to get what you want. At first, everything was simple. My wife was warm, caring, and always there. We shared that spark, that connection you hear people talk about, the one that makes you feel like you finally found your perfect match. Then slowly things started to change. I figured the growing distance between us was just stress or the everyday chaos. She was always tired, always busy, rarely in the mood. I kept telling myself that every relationship has its ups and downs, and that I needed to be patient. But soon enough, I noticed a pattern. It wasn't that our closeness was random. It was like she decided when I got to be close. Whenever she needed something, a favor, a little luxury like a new bag, or even a vacation, she'd suddenly be warm and affectionate. And if things didn't go her way, she'd turn cold without a second thought. I began remembering all those times when she'd kiss me like she used to, whisper in my ear, or pull me close, and it hit me. There was always something in it for her. Every bit of affection came with a hidden price tag. One night, everything came to a head during a minor argument. I can't recall all the details. It might have been about our weekend plans or how she'd cancel my suggestions, but the moment I asked for something, the tone shifted in that all too familiar way. She let out a heavy sigh and rolled her eyes, as if I were just a nuisance. "You act like I owe you something," she snapped, folding her arms. "Just because we're married doesn't mean you can expect me to do everything for you." Hearing her say that so casually made me pause. I'd been working long hours, planning dates, doing everything I could to keep our marriage alive. Yet when I needed even a little in return, it felt like I was asking for the impossible. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even as I realized what our love had really become. "So what do you expect from me?" She asked, frowning. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees. "You just said you don't owe me anything." "Then what do I owe you?" she replied, blinking in surprise. I pushed on. "Am I still supposed to cover the bills, plan dates, buy you gifts, and be there for you even when you shut me out?" She just scoffed. "That's different." "How?" I pressed. She opened her mouth to answer but then hesitated, because she knew exactly what I meant. Deep down, she understood that everything I did was expected. I was meant to be the provider, the supporter, the one you could always count on. But the moment I asked for even a bit of effort, some presence, or a little intimacy in return, suddenly she acted like she didn't owe me a damn thing. I felt that truth hit me hard, like a weight on my chest. This wasn't love. It was just a transaction. She was perfectly comfortable knowing I'd always be around, always waiting, always working harder than she ever would. For the first time, I saw it all clearly. She assumed I had no choice but to accept it, and that was when everything shifted. I didn't argue or fight back. I simply nodded and stood up, letting the cold realization sink in. She'd been using our closeness as a leash, a tool for control. But here's the thing about power. It only works if you let someone have it, and I was done letting her control me. That night marked a turning point. Something inside me changed, not with slammed doors or angry demands, but quietly, as I stopped caring. For years, I was the one chasing her, always putting in the effort to keep our marriage alive. And for what? To be treated like a needy beggar asking for scraps of affection? Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up before her as usual. But instead of making her coffee like I always did, I made only one cup for myself. When she finally got up, rubbing sleep from her eyes and glancing at the counter, she asked, irritated, "You didn't make me one." I took a slow sip of my coffee and shrugged. "I figured you didn't need me to." She narrowed her eyes, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. For years, I'd done all those little things, making coffee, filling up the tank, planning our weekends, and not once had she shown any real appreciation. That whole expectation, I was set on smashing it. Over the next few days, I began tweaking my habits in subtle yet intentional ways. I stopped firing off texts during the day and quit checking in on how she was doing. I even let our dinners pass in quiet without trying to spark any conversation. At first, it went unnoticed, but soon enough, she began to feel the change. One evening in the living room, she finally asked, "Why so quiet?" I glanced up from my phone and simply replied, "I'm just exhausted." She frowned, not pressing the issue, at least not immediately. A few days later, she decided to test me again by climbing onto my lap like she used to when she felt playful. Usually I would have drawn her in, kissed her, and shown all the enthusiasm. This time, though, I barely reacted. I let her linger for a moment before gently shifting her off and standing up. "I'm going to take a shower," I said, leaving her sitting there, visibly thrown off. That was the moment I first noticed her faltering confidence. She had always believed she had me completely under her thumb. She had taken for granted that she could dangle affection like bait, and I'd always scramble after it. But now I was deliberately pulling away, and she had no idea how to handle that shift. Then one night, while she was idly scrolling on her phone, she offhandedly remarked, "We should plan a trip soon. Maybe that cabin we liked?" In the past, I'd leap at the opportunity, checking dates and organizing everything so she wouldn't have to lift a finger. But this time, I didn't even spare a glance from my book. I just muttered, "Yeah, maybe," and fell silent. I could feel her eyes on me, expecting some reaction, some sign of me being interested like before, but nothing came. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and that's when it struck her. The balance was tipping. At first, she tried to pretend nothing had changed, but then little digs began to fly. Over dinner, she snapped, "You've been acting weird." I simply shrugged and said, "Same as always." She scoffed and jabbed her fork into her salad, pressing, "Seriously, what's going on with you?" I met her gaze evenly and answered, "Nothing." That was the key difference. I stopped getting sucked into her emotional games. Before, if she got upset, I'd rush to fix things. If she turned distant, I'd ask what was wrong. Now I just didn't give a damn, and that was driving her crazy. As I distanced myself at home, I began redirecting my energy. I focused on me. I started hitting the gym harder than I had in years, working out like never before. And guess what? People started noticing. Other women were in the picture too, not in any blatant way, just little shifts in how I carried myself. Like that trainer at the gym who held my gaze a bit longer than usual, or a coworker who complimented my new suit, details I never cared about before. But now I let them linger. It wasn't that I was planning on straying. I just wanted to see how my wife would react when she realized she wasn't the only one with any pull in our relationship. And sure enough, she picked up on it. One night, when I got home later than usual, everything changed. Back then, she never minded what time I walked in. In fact, she'd often prefer me being out so she could do her own thing. But this time, I found her waiting at the door. "Where have you been, Wem?" she asked casually as I stepped inside. I tossed my keys on the table and replied, "Jim." She tilted her head, studying me. "You've been out a lot lately," she observed. I couldn't help but smirk and say, "Yeah, feels good." I could tell she was trying to hide something behind that remark. I saw it, a flash of insecurity. For the first time, she started questioning me, realizing that maybe she wasn't the sole center of my world anymore. And that realization clearly scared her. Later one evening, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, and I was busy making a drink at the kitchen counter, she suddenly asked, "Are you happy?" I raised an eyebrow, genuinely caught off guard. "What?" she prompted, finally looking up. "Are you happy with us?" Not too long ago, I would have jumped in to hash it out, reassure her, and prove that I still cared. But this time, I just took a sip of my drink and smiled. "I'm good," I said simply. "Why do you ask?" Her lips parted in surprise. She hadn't expected that calm response. She was ready for anger or desperation, for some kind of plea for attention. Instead, I was content, and that unsettled her more than any argument ever did. There comes a point when someone realizes they're no longer in control, when the old rules just stop working. I watched that moment happen with my wife. It all began subtly, almost unnoticed. But day by day, she sensed the change, and I could tell it rattled her. For years, she'd held all the power, convinced that I was locked in and that she could withhold affection without consequence. But now she felt uncertain. She started testing me with little experiments, trying to see if I'd slip back into my old ways. One morning, she even switched up her outfit, as if to provoke a reaction. She started showing more skin, upping her game in subtle ways. One morning, she walked into the kitchen in one of those outfits I used to love. Tight shorts, a loose tank top, no bra. Normally, I'd have noticed right away, made a comment, or pulled her close. But this time, I barely looked up from my coffee. She lingered longer than usual, clearly watching me, waiting for some kind of reaction. When nothing happened, she let out a sigh as if it didn't matter. Yet, I caught that flicker of doubt in her eyes, the first sign she was unsure about the effect she once had on me. Before long, she began asking questions she never used to ask. Are you working late again? Who were you talking to? You've been at the gym a lot, huh? Before, she didn't care about where I was. She even enjoyed the space. Now, however, she was noticing the distance because I wasn't her sole priority anymore. And that realization frightened her. One night, while I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, she slid next to me and pressed her body against mine. I didn't react. She ran her fingers lightly over my chest, her warm breath tickling my neck. Moves that would normally have drawn me in and erased any tension. This time, though, I stayed still. As her hand drifted lower, fiddling with the waistband of my shorts and waiting for a response, I only smirked. Without saying a word, I shifted, rolled over, and turned off the bedside lamp. She sat there completely, and I didn't need to see her face to know how rattled she was. She'd never experienced rejection like that before, and now she was the one being denied. After that, she began to change. First, it was small gestures, doing my laundry without me asking, making dinner instead of ordering takeout, actually listening when I spoke. Then it turned into bigger moves, planning a date night, something she'd never done, suggesting vacation ideas, even asking about my day as if she truly cared. She was trying to win me back, but I didn't respond the way she expected. I accepted her gestures without offering gratitude or the emotional validation she craved. I just let her scramble, and she hated it. One evening, as I was heading out to grab a drink with a friend, she finally snapped. "Where are you going?" she asked, arms crossed. I glanced at my watch and said, "Meeting up with some people." Her brow furrowed. "Since when?" she pressed. I shrugged. "Made plans earlier." Taking a deep breath in an attempt to sound casual, she added, "Oh, anyone I know?" I just smiled in response. "Why should it matter?" she snapped, her eyes flashing. I just said, "I'm only asking," and let a silence settle before I tilted my head, studying her face. "Are you worried about something?" I prodded. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but she hesitated. There was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. This wasn't the way things were meant to be. I used to be the one who needed her, predictable and all over the place. Now it was she who seemed unsure. I gave her a small, knowing smirk that let her imagination run wild. "Don't wait up," I said, grabbing my keys. As I headed out the door, I realized something. For the first time in our marriage, she was afraid of losing me, and that fear was only going to grow. There's a moment when desperation gives way to the stark truth that you've already lost someone. I saw that dawning in her eyes. For months, she treated our intimacy like a reward, a tool she could use as leverage, convinced that I'd never stop chasing after her. But now the tables had turned. She was the one chasing me, and I made sure she understood just how replaceable her so-called power really was. One evening, I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when she walked in wearing nothing but a silk robe. I didn't react at first. She paused in the doorway, then came over and sat down beside me. Gently, she placed her hand on my thigh and slowly slid her fingers upward. "You've been distant lately," she murmured in a low voice. I kept scrolling and replied casually, "Have I?" She frowned, clearly not expecting that kind of indifference. I finally looked up. Her robe hung loosely, revealing smooth skin and lips parted ever so slightly. Before, I'd have pulled her close without a second thought, but now, to me, she was just another woman. I gave her a slow, unimpressed glance, letting the moment drag on a bit before I smirked and said, "Not tonight." Her whole expression fell. "What?" she asked, as if she hadn't heard me clearly. "I'm just not in the mood," I explained. She pulled her hand back a bit and searched my face, trying to decipher what I meant, but all she got was silence. "You're always in the mood," she pressed. "Not anymore," I replied firmly. I saw her breath catch, a flash of panic that told me she finally realized something was off. For so long, she'd believed that she controlled our intimacy, that I was always desperate for her attention. Now, for the first time, she was the one being denied. At first, she tried to act nonchalant about it. She laughed lightly and rolled her eyes. "Okay, fine. You're tired," she said, as if that explained everything. "Come on, babe." She reached for me again, but I gently brushed her hand aside and I saw her smile falter for a moment. Her fingers curled as tension tightened her shoulders. "What's going on with you?" she demanded, her tone sharper than before. I leaned back on the couch, stretching out, completely relaxed. "What do you mean?" She exhaled. "You've been acting different, cold, distant, like you don't even matter anymore," she added, fixing her eyes on me. Calm, detached, unbothered, I replied, meeting her gaze. Then I dropped the same empty line she had used on me for years. I don't owe you anything. Her mouth fell open and she blinked once, twice. Stunned, almost instantly, anger replaced that shock. This isn't funny, she snapped. I'm not joking, you're punishing me. I laughed lightly and shook my head. Is that what you think? I said. No, sweetheart. I'm just finally getting what your rules were all about. Her eyes narrowed as she challenged. What the hell do you mean? I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, so I was looking down at her. You told me I wasn't owed intimacy, I began slowly, and then I realized you're not entitled to commitment either. She flinched as if I just slapped her. Excuse me? You set the rules, I continued. You made it clear that this marriage is just a convenience for you. You only dish out affection when it suits you, never really putting me first, just treating me like an option. I let my voice drop, slow and cutting. So now you're nothing more than an option too. Her chest heaved and her breath came in shaky bursts. She wasn't used to this at all. For years she'd believed I was completely hers, that I'd always see her as my wife. But now she was just another woman. Replaceable, forgettable, nothing special. And she knew it. Furious, she sprang up from the couch. This is bullshit, she spat. You think you're untouchable now? You think you can just walk around acting like you're... She stopped mid-sentence, as if the truth finally hit her. Because, yes, I could easily act that way. Because I finally realized I wasn't trapped anymore. For years, she was convinced I had no other option. That I'd never leave, that I needed her far more than she needed me. But now she was finally seeing the truth. I wasn't scared of being on my own, and that scared her to no end. She stepped back and wrapped her arms around herself as confusion melted into pain. You don't love me anymore, she whispered. I let the silence linger. I didn't answer right away because honestly I wasn't sure myself. Did I really love her, or was I just holding on to the idea of what we used to be? I stood up, stretched a bit, and asked, does it even matter? Glancing at the clock, I added, it's late, I'm heading to bed, and walked past her, leaving her standing there completely shattered. There's a big difference between losing control and realizing you've already lost. I saw that moment in her eyes, when she understood it wasn't just that the power had shifted, but that I had stopped chasing her, and now I was leaving. Nothing she did or said could change that. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. I stretched, made a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table like it was any ordinary morning. She was already up, standing near the counter, watching me with a pale face and eyes puffy from crying. She must have spent the night tossing and turning, replaying everything in her head, trying to figure out when she lost control. I just took a slow sip of my coffee, calm and unbothered. Morning, I said. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter as she mumbled, we need to talk. I smirked and replied, do we? She exhaled sharply and ran a hand through her hair. Look, I know last night got tense. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just feel like we've grown so disconnected lately, and I don't want things to stay like this. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Now she wanted to fix things. Now that she saw I wasn't desperate, now that she realized I wasn't trapped. But it was too late, way too late. She stepped closer, softening her tone. Maybe we could take a trip? Get away for a weekend? Just the two of us? I let out a small, ironic chuckle. That's funny. She blinked, confused. What's funny? I tilted my head and said, the timing. You had all the time in the world to care before, but now that you see me slipping away, suddenly you want to reconnect? That's pretty ironic. I raised a hand to cut her off. I'm not interested. At that, she flinched. That one simple remark hit her harder than any argument ever could. For the first time, she realized she was on the receiving end of rejection. And with that, she let her guard fall. She tried every trick in the book. Guilt trips, apologies, even turning on the charm. Can we just talk about this? She pleaded. Please don't wreck everything over one mistake. I was just upset when I said that. You know I love you. Do you really want to lose us? I didn't counter or explain. I simply got up, walked past her, and headed toward our bedroom. She followed silently behind me. What are you doing? She asked as I pulled a suitcase from the closet and set it on the bed. Her breath caught. You're not serious, she whispered. I unzipped the case and started packing, and in that instant, her composure crumbled. You can't just leave. You're my husband. she blurted, stepping in front of me. I calmly folded a shirt and placed it inside. Was, I corrected softly. Her hands trembled as she stuttered, "You don't mean that?" I looked at her and tilted my head. "Why wouldn't I asked. Saib ishai my mama. Her lip quivered as she tried to explain. Because, because we love each other. I let out a quiet laugh. You love the me who used to worship you, not who I am now. Tears filled her eyes. You're punishing me, she murmured. No, I said simply, zipping up my woot case. I had finally realized I deserved better. She drew a shaky, desperate breath, panicked and terrified. For so long, she believed I'd never leave, that I needed her more than she needed me. Now, watching me pack up, she had no power left. I rolled my suitcase toward the door, and she followed, her voice breaking as she pleaded, "Please, just please stay. We can fix this," she insisted. I paused at the front door and glanced over my shoulder. You can't fix something that's already broken. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. She knew. She knew she'd taken me for granted, assumed I'd always be there. And now she was left alone, realizing her control over me was never real. I opened the door, stepped outside, and without looking back, walked away. As I settled into my car, I let out a slow breath, feeling years of manipulation finally lift off my shoulders. I wasn't filled with anger or sadness. I just felt free. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel trapped in my own marriage.